Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Man, I can't wait to bring on Kayla. Man, she's one of the people that I've met a couple of years ago. We talk, we just connect, and wow. And also, one of the things why we're bringing her on, especially right now. So this week, I want everybody to vote. It's for free. Free, free. What can you do for free to help somebody? Man, she was nominated for the People's Artist by sponsored by Johnny Depp, and I think he's just a He's just the spokesperson. So
Yes.
he's just a pretty face. But Kayla is also the pretty face. We want to vote for, support her, and support her art. And art is so important because then it's an expression of who we are, what we do, and the things that we feel. So, how you doing this morning, Kayla?
I'm so good, Dave. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I try to support you. I actually, I'll be the first to admit, I also support John Chandler. I don't know if you know John. He's a great guy that
Oh,
I've met, and he also so like you had put out a lot of the posts about this, and then he was also nominated. So I was like, oh, I really like John.
I gotta meet him.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll connect you guys afterwards.
Please.
And there was times that he was like, "Well, I don't know if anybody's gonna like me." I was like, and I love John as a human, and I was like, "Oh man, how do I? I want to support everybody." So that's why every time I see one of your posts about, I push it out, and like every other day, I'll vote for you, and then I'll vote for him, and
Thank you.
I'm trying to share, with people who support me. I try to support them as well and do the best. So tell us a little bit about this, your art, that you got nominated for the People's Choice Award. I mean, that's pretty cool to get visibility like that.
It is.
And so
It is.
one of the things I just want to point out, so she's already made the initial cut, right? They went from the big whatever nomination to now, and that's why we're talking about it, is May 21st. You get to vote for the next cutoff, right? They have constant
Yes.
cut up. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your art and yourself?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny. I would say the me from even just a few years ago probably would have never entered a contest like this, but I've been going through so many changes as an artist and some of the other things that I do that I'm kind of in, and we talk about the Phoenix a lot, you and I.
Yep.
I'm kind of in that Phoenix moment of my life where it's kind of like a do or die choice. Like you better push for something or what? You get to a place in your life where it's kind of go time and go all in on something.
Mm.
And I feel like that's where I am with my art. That's where I am with business in general, just to kind of like push as an entrepreneur. I mean, I've been walking that path now full time since 2017, been building that business since well before that. I've been in the art industry, the healing industry for over 20 years doing these things for clients and people. So so my art specifically, just on the art side, I guess you could label me an abstract expressionist, but what makes my art very unique to people who want to interact or engage with it is people are having big, whether you want to call it a spiritual moment or a personal moment, they are having a healing response
Mm.
that changes their belief. It might change a physical sensation in the body. It brings people back to a space of safety to feel, which I think is one of the most important things about art. We give you permission through beauty. Well, even if it's not beautiful, it doesn't matter. That's in the eye of the beholder. But we give you permission in a safe way to remember what it's like to feel,
Mm.
especially if it's involved in a subject. There are a lot of painters out there, including myself at times, who paint things on social justice, commentary of the times of what they're living in as a painter. So you run the gamut with art that is the mirror of the world around you. And sometimes I feel like art wins where words fail.
Mm.
And kind of brings this relatability, whether you identify as an artist, a painter, or not. Everything around you has been designed by an artist. Signage, okay, that's a graphic designer. Buildings, architect, that's such an art. there's so many vast forms of it, even outside of painting. So for me, as an abstract expressionist, I have been painting my healing journey and my connection with spirit. You know, that's in my belief set, just connecting with that higher understanding, and channeling things for people to have these experiences with, you know, and it's helping me heal because I got to a place in my life where I was like, I need to do something that is not what I am currently doing. So I picked up my brush for myself. For the first time as an artist, I began painting and doing design work for myself.
And so how do you feel? The great thing is, I've known some really good artists, including yourself, that you look at paintings and you're like, okay, I don't get it at the beginning, right? You don't know what it is, and then you have to take that intentional look at it. Like my friend Steve, that's where the first time I saw it, and he does some real deep uh paintings that once he started explaining, I go, Steve, really, what is this? And it's not an abstract, so it was always with characters and a lot of mythical figures in there blended in, and I'm like, man, what's going through? And then he starts going, well, what does it mean to you? And you think about it and look, is that
Mhm.
how you want somebody to do it, like not being like a little kid, and I don't mean to mean anybody's art. Like when you come home as a little kid, you're like, "Hey, mom, dad, uncle, who, aunt, I see the picture. Here's my son. Here's my son. Here's my house.
Mhm.
Here's my nice little flower." That you want to identify that, but
Yes.
as you progress along the way, do we not all care what everybody identifies to, but what they see, feel, touch, and maybe even taste when
Yes.
they see it.
Yes. I feel like well, you brought up a couple different things which I think are important. Some people, you know, likening what we do as abstract artists to you hear a lot like a child can do that, you know, and then just how it evolves, like you're kind of talking about. I think the difference of what separates, you know, people who move into or have always continued to be an artist of some kind, of painter, abstract expressionist, or abstraction in general, is you learn intentional composition and emotional architecture, where in the childlike space, you've maintained a beautiful purity of curiosity that has everywhere to grow upwards and outwards. And as you kind of come into being a professional artist or someone who's working on that craft every day, that's where the differentiation comes. It's not just the ability to make a mark, it's controlled intuition, it's awareness of visual language, it's color, it's tension, it's balance, it's rupture, right?
Mm.
So, so in that space, there's a different level of connection to the feeling of the thing, but we don't want to discount how pure and incredible childhood art is, because they are just coming from an unencumbered place. Now, as adults, if we could marry that with the gifts that we had as a child, that's that's magic. That's magic.
So,
So for, you know, just to speak to your other point, I think the experience will always be in the eye of the beholder. People say
mm.
that about beauty, but I don't believe that all art is beautiful, in that it, you know, doesn't have to be. Art is meant to make you think and feel. And what does it say about you or your emotions or your belief sets? It's a challenge. It's not always just about decor. Real art is not Bed Bath and Beyond and the things that you buy in TJ Maxx. It's heart, it's soul. You know, so when someone stands in and what they want to look at it, like when you were talking about with your friend, I think the greatest thing that someone can do, and I actually was asked this question, like, doesn't it bother you that people tell you what they see? I'm like, no, that's the whole point. Like, no, we want to know, or at least I do. I can't speak for other artists out there. Yes, I have a meaning for what happens when it appears, and I get things out of my own work, but it's meant to be stared into. Talk to me about this. What was your process here? I'm feeling this when I look at it. That creates community. That creates conversation.
Mm.
That's power.
Yeah, no, and that's what I. So when you sit down to for a piece, you don't sit. Do you actually sit down with the conscious thought, like, "Hey, I'm gonna paint XYZ," or does it really start flowing through universe or connection to whatever you might be feeling that day, or kind of the
Mhm.
counterbalance to what you're feeling that day?
Yeah, I think that that's a brilliant question. And I will offer to you that sometimes I start differently, but the most consistent way I see myself showing up to answer that is I have a need to move energy or a sensation or an emotion that I can't reconcile. And sometimes the only time I find calm or the ability to nervous system regulate is through the pull of the paint with the brush.
Mm.
There are other times where I will sit down and say, geez, I'm really inspired by like Van Gogh's one of my peeps. Like,
Yep.
love that man, his whole story, and a special caveat to the mental health side of things with artists as well. And he's one of them. And I sit with his energy, or I sit with the notion of his paintings, or I look at his work and I'll get inspired. I'm like, wow, I really like to do something within this color palette because it's so inspiring and I want to play there. But I will tell you the way spirit works through me as an intuitive painter. As soon as I try and make it something from the start, the universe has other ideas.
Mm.
And that's why I think what happens with my paintings is so unique, because that's where the energy, the healing energies, the reading energies, the symbolic side of things come through, because I'm not controlling that. I'm a vessel for that.
Yeah, that's really powerful when you are able to do that, to recognize the difference, right? It sort of takes the ego out of a lot of it, as being a tool versus the guy, right? I mean, I think, when you go back to Van Gogh, that's what he did. He just was an observant person, right? Starry Night was from a mental institution, but he was just observing. He wasn't like, I'm gonna paint this.
Yeah.
It was, feelings and things like that. How do you reconcile, or how did you at the beginning, right? I'm sure, we could ask your parents, when as a little kid, I'm sure you painted the house, the flower, the sun, and everything like that. How did you evolve into thinking this type of way, where you're looking for at some of the masters just for palette inspiration or things like that?
I think I evolved into this way of painting because as I was in school, I mean, yes, I've been doing art and some sort of art, music,
Hmm.
and all the things that I do now since I was a kid. And actually, I used to paint a lot of unicorns and dragons and, things like that, out mermaids, a lot of mermaids, a lot of beach, a lot of whales. That's the thing. That was the thing for me. And I think I evolved because as I was going through school, starting just around the end of high school and then my college career, I was also butting into the healing and personal growth world. So Reiki, readings, yes, tarot, channeling, things like that. So I feel like because I had an insatiable curiosity for anything occult wise,
Hmm.
and I think like regardless of what people listening may believe, for me, I feel like I'm an old soul. I feel like I've like this is not my first incarnation in earth, and I do feel like for me that insatiable curiosity is because my soul's mission is somehow to bring forward these energetic pieces. And I don't always know the whole concept of it. I generally help other people with that, but you know I feel like that's why I evolved, because as I was painting and learning the techniques, I was building this other business on the side. And it didn't even start as a business. It started because I had that insatiable curiosity. And I went through a period of time where I was like, if I don't get some help for some shit, I'm not going to make it. And that's happened a couple times in my life where, you kind of hit a wall mentally, physically, belief set. and you start tearing all the things out of the bones that was originally built that don't fit the structure anymore,
Sure.
you know? So, I met one of my first Reiki healers, and, she began to train me, and then everything cracked open from there, which actually started as a child, but I kind of shut it down because there was no place for that where I grew up. There was no way for me to talk. I didn't even think to talk about it. So to me, the evolution of that was tandem with building this healing experience and then beginning to bring it to other people. So that's why right now, with the competition and the things, and why I'm speaking about things the way that I am, is I want to merge that for people. Started bringing people from the energy psychic healing world of the things that I do into helping them process it through art experiences as well, you know. So it can be really powerful. So I think that's how I got there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great because everybody has their own journey, and where, like for me, painting is still uncomfortable for me. I still look like when I paint, I'm that kindergarten kid. Uh, I'm stuck in my kindergarten, whereas other areas I'm more advanced. Like my photography. I love my photography, so just the vision. And so when you're working that twined relationship between your intuitive side and your artist side, right? I mean, it's one in the whole. It's not, it's not like, okay, here's one side of the brain versus the other. Those skill sets. How do you intertwine, or how do you bring that together for somebody like me who might be a little bit more resistant on the art side, on the physical art side, the painting or things like that?
Well, I think because I believe that creativity is a birthright, and you don't have to identify as a painter or this idea or notion of talent in order to get the benefits of what being artistic or creative can do. So when I'm blending something for someone, I will create a custom experience for them. I have a meeting with them. I will sit with their energy for, maybe a week or two, sometimes longer. And I always disclose that with people when I'm meeting. And I generally, if they want the art side of things in conjunction with the energy side of things, we do a session, and then on the counter weekend, we do the art piece. And the art stuff I would prefer for it to be in person because it's a whole different experience, but that doesn't mean I couldn't do it remote either, as long as we set the intention that the things that I'm channeling for them as a process to bring them through will translate in that space. And that's the biggest part of bridging the gap there, is
Sure.
having a very clear intention about what the goal is, and what that client is really after, listening, really tuning in, really tapping into what they're saying, what their energy is telling me. So then bridging it into the gap of working into, I will keep them in, well, not keep them, I want them to go wherever they need to
Hmm.
go, but the structure is a little bit more in the abstract style, so you don't feel pressure to make, like, if and I've even done therapeutic art for myself. So when I've sat with someone, they're like, we want you to draw our house. I'm like, snooze, now I don't even want to be here, because it creates a pressure, right? Mark making, which is a huge important piece of any painting, drawing, but specifically within abstraction and that structure that we talked about. So child's drawing is expressive but unstructured at times, depending on, like,
Hmm.
you know what those things are that the masters kind of show you: golden proportion, layout, etc. I will channel for them, okay, here's your process. Like, I'll give you an example. So I had a client, she signed on with me for 3 months, and we did energy work, healing, tap in, coaching the first week. And then the second week, she's in the studio with me. And one of the first projects I had her do was called Vessel, because her specific needs had to do with coming into embodiment and
Hmm.
really claiming and remaking herself in her own uniqueness.
Hmm.
So we worked with clay that day specifically for her. And when you work with me, it doesn't always have to be painting, but that's the medium that I am best at outside of clay sculpture. And it's also the easiest to translate without feeling frustrated, because if you're frustrated, you can make a mark
Right.
that dictates frustration. and we can talk about what it looks like or what color might mean it. So with the vessel project, we used clay, and I brought her through a guided somatic experience with specific prompts that allowed her to kind of explore what those prompts might mean. And then she ended up with this incredible anatomy like piece, divine feminine sacred object that she ended up finishing on her own with little details and putting it in a sacred space in her home. It like I stood back. Now this is a girl who has never touched clay, never touched art, and she built this incredible piece through this experience. So we did that for about 3 months, and what she got out of it and how we were able to use the coaching and intuitive message side for her to find her answers as well was
Mm,
like I walked away from that like, okay, this is a thing. I have something here. This is working. This is working for people in a different way.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I think that's the power is also it becomes so individualized that,
Yes.
while, again, art is very individualized, when it's a little bit more abstract, when you don't see things. I mean, I remember, in high school, my first girlfriend, we'd go to art, but she was a big, she loved art, and I liked being around her. So we went to a lot of museums. But I learned so much about the hidden messages, right? We call them Easter eggs now, but
Yeah.
even in the religious paintings, the symbolism. But then when you go into some of the more advanced and you hear what the things that we didn't see, but then it makes you think that much further, right? Van Gogh is, just using that example, the paintings could stand on its own, but then when you realize he did some of that in a mental war, it gives you different thoughts, right? Depending on your belief of that, did he belong there, did he didn't? It was just time wise, but it's also just the other thoughts of, wow, what skill sets do we have within ourselves that maybe we discount within each other?
Correct. And I feel like even with this particular client, there were skill sets that came through just through the process. And one of the questions I asked her at one of the last days of us working in the studio together, and I said, okay, so you solved this problem on the canvas. Now, how would you take the process of how you solved that problem and bring it into this particular piece that you're troubled over? And she made the connection and was immediately able to say, yep, I see it this way, this is how I'm going to do it. So it's so much of an experience, and then you get to take home something that either maybe you continue working on, or it's finished in the studio and you like it the way that it is. I really feel like art, for some people, I don't generally like to make blanket statements, but I do believe for some people it will teach you problem solving in
For sure.
unique ways.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way with writing. When I help a client with writing, I've had lots of clients who, like, I didn't see it that way. They tell their life story, and I'm working intuitively to try to guide them a little bit, to get their story out, the story that they want to hear, but also the power of healing and things like that. One of my clients was like, "Man, I didn't see my mother that way," and where they were conflicting and stuff like that. And even though her mother had already transitioned, she was able to find healing within that. And I
Mm,
think there's so many different ways when you are there with somebody intuitive and somebody who can guide you to that next level, like yourself, to really understand the healing that can also happen while you're being an artist, while you're going through that art journey.
yeah. And you can really process mother wounding, uh, mental health pieces, divine feminine, even they call it mother wounding, but I believe there's father wounding too. I think that there's a lot of different things in the spiritual world and the psychotherapy world that people work on that can translate into expressive arts.
No.
And just like your client who through her writing, because stories are a big thing, right? You talk about how important the stories are. Well, putting your story into a visual so that you can have a reflection time with it, or into a writing where you can have reflection time, the nuggets come. The nuggets come, and it's
100%.
amazing.
Yeah. And in conversation, that's where I feel they know their feelings. So like when you're working with a client, or I would assume it goes the same way, is the colors that they choose. You don't give them, okay, here, for Dave, you might sit down and be like, okay, here's all the different variants of green. I mean, that's really, like, because of my teal, and we've had that conversation, but there's so many different gradients of that. And
Absolutely.
I'm like, well, it's what shirt comes out today. Like, my suits, like your shirt might be your shirt, but there's lighter teals. There's different, there's different teal, right? There's blue green teal. There's a green blue teal.
Yes.
And those are the things that I'm like, yeah, I'm comfortable with it. No, no, but which one is yours? I'm like, yes, and it could be, there's times. I mean, I love other colors because it brings out the emotion as well as really where we sit. And so, of course, I'm sure you've had people who like, I don't know. And how do you move them forward? The people who are like, who are resistant, and, not see, I'm resistant because I don't believe I have the ability to do some of the work, some of the things. I haven't worked those muscles yet, but I don't
Mhm.
have I could explain to you in a million different ways what I feel like, what it tastes like, and all those things. So that's not the type of person we're looking at. The person who goes, Kayla, I don't believe any of this. What do you mean I'm going to get emotions out of this? What do you tell somebody like that? I know that's not your ideal client either,
I was just
but
gonna say, I'm like, that's probably not someone I'm working with. That's
yeah,
not my
yeah.
purpose. That's
But
not my
but
person.
but I know you do workshops and intensives,
Yeah, I do.
and there's always somebody who's like, who might say, "Hey, just come with me to this thing. You'll
Yeah.
paint." I mean, that's how I did some of the paint night, the sipping paints, and I'm like, "All right, I'm willing to do it. I'll give you my all. I don't make fun." You have those guys who go to those events who will just go, "Okay, it doesn't matter," uh, and I'll get it done, and I'll paint it. I'll purposely almost caricature it, but but when I go, I'm all there doing the best
Hmm.
of my little ability.
Yeah. I think what's important, because I've worked, in my line of work, especially being I mean, I don't mind saying like I'm a very brilliant psychic. And I have had people sit in front of me and say, I don't even know why I'm here. So and so bought me a reading. I don't know that I even believe in this stuff.
Hmm.
And now I would, I feel like I'm in a different vibration, so I don't attract as much as that. But, you know, I think what you need to do, including within the art side of things, is remind them that this isn't about creating a piece of art, take the pressure out of things,
Hmm.
bring it to a relatable place. Even with the readings and things like that, when people get into that space, I said, okay, well, the free will is always within the sitter. It's not the practitioner.
Right.
The free will, I mean, we do have that, but when you're working in a client-based relationship, you have to provide a space that speaks to the person and what they're about to do. Sometimes when there's resistance, prompts really help. And that's why I do a lot of channeling first before I create something for someone, because I'm listening to their energy. I'm listening to the words they're saying. So people who are in resistant, that usually comes from a childhood wound where they're afraid to be seen and heard, emotions are not safe, or they left a ton of projects undone because a finished product meant, oh, I'll be seen and judged on that, and I
Hmm.
don't want to be judged. Like I could go down the list of the things that I've
Sure.
seen, in the last 20 years. So you kind of have to speak to that space. So if someone came to me and said, I just, I'm in resistance, I'd say, okay, well, then don't worry about thinking through it. Can you just grab something without attachment? If you're not attached to any of this and you don't really care what happens here because you're not concerned or you don't believe in this, just grab any tube without looking at it, or grab a pencil without looking at it. I want to take the frustration and the pressure out of something like that. And then I would say, okay, so if you gave this resistance a voice, if you gave this resistance a color outside of the one that you chose, does it have a form? Can you give it a shape? What would it look like? If it's not a visual thing for you, could you close your eyes and just move your body with a feeling? What does it feel like to make this resistance on paper?
Mm.
And start in a space like that.
Right. Coming at it, what you really hit me with, what does it feel like? Like people understand what it feels like.
Yeah,
Again, if they're willing to share. But
yeah.
but there's so many different ways, and that's why when I work with somebody, and I can't. Okay, you can't. Can we just at least are you comfortable with us talking about it? And
Yes.
the whatever that is, and then you figure out what does it taste like? It tastes
Mm-hmm.
metallic. It tastes like whatever they might have, and then you work it differently, and then what would it taste like? If we did this,
Yeah.
and work their way through a whole bunch of different things.
That's a really, really important piece that you're bringing up because in art and in music, there are phenomenons specifically within music, and I'm going to forget the name of what this is called, but where people hear color.
Yeah.
So they'll hear a note and they'll be like, oh, you mean yellow? And people who don't understand that phenomenon or have never heard of it kind of look at them and go, huh? And I was actually around someone like that when I was in high school, and we were in music theory class at that time. And, my God bless her, I love her, Sylvia, my teacher at the time, was playing the piano, and she was showing us, perfect fifths and, all these different things and getting us to ear train within music theory. And, she called on this one student. She goes, okay, what's this? And he goes, oh, yellow. And so he would say like the colors so this is like a real thing. And okay, so basically what I do is I guide to embody safety and self energy, soul wholeness, and reignite people's oracle and temple of personal truth with energies and art. And as someone who does that on the oracle side of things, embodiment and somatic experiences make that up. So when you're stuck and you talk about, well, it tastes metallic, right? Okay, well, great. What's that color look like for you? If you can, people have forgotten how important the body is, and we disassociate a lot in this world because of survival techniques and things feeling overwhelming and being on too much hustle of social media. And I do feel like ascension isn't about getting up and out of the body and reaching into spirit that way. I believe it's descending into the body. I have a colleague, we talk about this a lot, who also shares this notion. I love you, Sherry, if she ever listens. But I really do feel like coming home to who you are in all of those spaces and places and senses of self are actually part of the body, major portions of the nervous system. So the somatic piece that you're talking about, or tasting the color, feeling it, or sensing it, is a huge part of learning communication with self, learning connection, because if you can't connect with yourself and what's happening here, regardless of needing to know, suspend needing to know for a minute
Right.
and just observation. Very hard to be at home inside this vessel that we're walking around in unless we can see the magic of it and use that as part of the antenna of your intuition and finding your personal truth through the exploratory of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's that willingness to explore, and you know, because there's so many ways we see it, and that's that somatic part. We have to recognize where we
Yeah.
store some of those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
People, and I never even believed any of that until I started learning, meeting people like yourself, and then start going, oh yeah, yeah, my neck always hurts when I'm really stressed.
Yeah.
It's more than just posture. It's more than and you know, why does that happen? And where you really do some clearing work, and
Mm-hmm.
it goes back to the chakras now that I've learned, and why when something hits me, it goes there because I have that challenge that I've overcome, of obviously, at least a little bit, to be able to speak my truth, and that is the biggest power that we have in our lives, communicating, and that's really where we go back to the art and all the other work we do is how we communicate it.
It is. And the body and your emotions, it's just information. And now that idea of what is being stored is being expanded upon through fascia, through the nervous system, and that it's more that the body is giving you information and recognizing patterns for you. So it's just asking, like, what needs nourishment, what needs help, what needs support, So there's a lot of expansion going on out there in the energy world as well as the psychotherapy world to kind of even look deeper beyond, is this something that's being stored in the body? So it's interesting. So everything within the body, everything within your emotion, it's information. The difference that happens around the information is you becoming the observer and learning to discern what the information is,
Mm,
and then moving it through some sort of process that allows you to process it.
yeah, and that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
So as we're closing on the episode, as crazy as it looks like, we spoke for almost 45 minutes, and I try
Oh
to
my
keep it on.
gosh.
Yeah, well, that's why you and I, when we talk, it just flows so easily, and I'd like you to walk into the magic garden. So I have a session at the end where you get to plant a seed that might
Mm,
grow right now, like Jack's magic beans, or a seed that people will listen to and be thinking about, kind of those earwigs or things that you're like, man, that was a really great piece of advice.
I love it.
What would be the seed that you'd like to plant today?
It sounds simple, but I wouldn't say it's always easy. And I would just say, keep trying.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, and I feel like that comes from my own experience because there were so many times I wanted to give up, and I would never shame anybody for choosing a version of what that could look like for them, because sometimes in the moment of giving in and giving up, that's when we can pivot to find something else.
Hmm.
So I want to be clear about how I say that, but I just feel like keep trying because it can look differently. Some days trying is putting on your pants.
Sure.
Some days trying is I'm going to put a little bit of effort into taking care of myself right now. And that just means breathing into this space. And I'm going to choose to be alive today. Choose to be alive today. And I feel like as long as you continue to choose that, then you get to continue to see what happens.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really powerful. It's that choice, and I just read something today that lies into that. Nothing ever dies until you stop trying, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to continually do something. And I'm
Mhm.
right now in the process of rebirthing books that I started 20 years ago, and you know, I put it aside. I talked about it and all those things, but they weren't ready, right? Each thing grows differently, and that's where we go with that that magic seed. So, how can everybody find you? Yes, we definitely want to. I'm going to in the show notes. We're going to have your voting link. But how can
Yay.
we find you besides your voting link?
Thank you. Yes. So if you want to follow just my art, then you would go to Instagram and it would be at Kaile.Dutton.art. And you actually spell my first name Kaile. And then, of course, you can find me on my Facebook page. That's where most of my community is. So it's just Kaile_Dutton. And I also have a Instagram page that connects just for that generalized, like you get a little bit of everything of who I am. And also that's also my name, Kaile Dutton. So pretty easy. And if none of the social media things work for you, just go to my website and shoot me an email, and don't be afraid to reach out for connection. So it's www.kailedutton.com. Very easy. Everything's my name.
That's how I do it.
Yeah.
There isn't a whole lot, but thank you so much. And there aren't a whole lot of people like yourself that I really enjoy talking to,
Same.
and connecting with. And I wish you the best of luck, not only on the competition, so doing my best for that, but I'm also, wish you the best of luck in everything. I'm here to support you, and I enjoy supporting people like you.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, and everybody else, as always, we want to wish you peace and love in your life, and that is the foundation of your life. And when you bring a bat, be awesome today and bring awesome thoughts. Thanks so
Awesome.
much. Have a great day.